Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today, we will look at creating a Windows service. Before we start delving into the code, what we want to look at first is what is a service and why would we want to create one. In Windows 10, if you go down to the taskbar at the bottom of the screen and right click, one of the options that comes up is Task Manager. If you click on Task Manager, you'll get a list of all the currently running processes on your computer. At the top of the screen, one of the tabs is labelled Services. If you click on that, you'll get a list of all these services that are set up on your computer. Some of these services will be stopped and some will be running. A service is a program which runs in the background. There are many Windows services and many services by different applications. These perform background tasks that the user doesn't need to monitor. So why would you want to write a service? A Windows service can be set up to start either automatically, delayed automatically, or manually. If we have a look at the bottom of the screen, there's an Open Services link. If we click on that and close down our Task Manager, we'll see more information on the services. Now in here we have a list of the services by name, their description and their startup type. As you will see, there are some services which start automatically when the system boots up. There are some which are set up to only be started when you manually start them. And there are others which are manually set to start on a trigger. If there is some service which needs to wait for the computer to boot up for a certain length of time, then you can set them as a delayed start. If there's some task you wish to perform in the background, which every time the computer boots up, this task will start, then creating a service is an ideal way to go. Before we start looking at the code, there's a couple of things to remember. This particular application uses the José Roca API libraries. Now we did cover these before in a previous video when we did web APIs, but it's worth going over them again now, just in case any of you haven't seen that one. In the Windows menu, there's an Options. If we click on the Options and click on the Compiler tab and look at the pointer for the includes, this is where PowerBasic actually looks for include files. When your application compiles, you may well have a number of include files specified in your source code. If you've specified a path in your .bas file, then the compiler will attempt to compile it from there. If you have not specified a path, say for example the Windows API include files, it will look in the folder you're currently in first, and then it will look in here. So it would look in this folder here first, and then if it doesn't find the API include file, it will look in the folder below. Now this folder here, the PBCC60 Win API, is the folder you would normally expect to see your Windows API include files in. Now I have moved that one below the José API folder, where my José API, Windows API calls, are actually held. Now I'm not including the José API libraries in the download from here, but I have provided a link in the source code and I'll put it in the description box below where you can download these from. Much of the code we're about to look at was created by Don Dickinson. So we owe a great debt of gratitude to him for actually creating these. I've made a few very minor changes to the program in order to let it compile under the current version of PowerBasic, as this code was written some time ago. So in writing a service, there are a number of things you want to do. You'll want to create your service to perform the task you wish to do. You'll then have to install your service on the computer and set it to say whether it's going to be manually started or automatically started when the machine boots up. So let's look down into the code. Now, there are three string constants at the beginning of the code, where you can set the name of your service, the display name that would appear in the Services and Task Manager, and the full description of what the service actually does, which is just basically for information. Obviously, the service name has to be unique. In this case, I've put 3 letters A at the beginning of our service name, just so it appears at the top of the list of all the services and saves us having to hunt for it. Now, while this program can compile under both the console compiler and the Windows compiler, we've set it to compile as a service. If you leave it at that, then the code as it stands will compile either under the console or the Windows compiler. If you take this line out, it will have to be compiled using the console compiler, but it will not compile as a service. It will compile as a console application. So since we're after a service, we'll leave this set to 1. Now there are a number of include files, for example this one here, which are in the folder. These I won't go into in detail, but they're worth you having a look at because there's a lot of really good code in there. So if we have a look first of all where the program begins, in our PB main function. Now this does make use of threads. I've done a couple of videos on threads which are worth having a look at. The first thing we're doing here is we are creating a wait thread. Most of the time your service will be sitting waiting for some event to happen. So running these in a thread is ideal. And this next line of code here is checking that we want to compile this as a service. So it's calling this initialization routine with our service name, our service display name, and a service description. And that's basically it. So if we have a look at the wait thread function, this is where you'll need to put your code. So this wait thread function will loop infinitely until such times as the service is actually shut down. And any code we want to put in would be in this section here. I've put some code in here to give our service something to do. As you can see from this, we're using the isFile function to look inside this ctemp folder to see whether this particular file exists or not. And if it does find this file, it will attempt to erase the file. The application will then wait for 10 seconds and then try again. So what we've got here is a process that will sit and wait and monitor a particular folder looking for the presence of a file every 10 seconds. Should that file exist, the service will then delete that file. An important thing to remember when you're writing a service is that there's no point actually sending message boxes to the user or bringing up windows for the user to see, because as you're running as a service, you're running an entirely different programming slot from the slot the user is in. So anything you attempt to put on the screen, the user will never see. If you want some other way of alerting the user, you can of course create something on the sound, so that if there are speakers on the computer, the user will then hear that. But most services don't require any feedback to the user at all. Whatever your service is doing, whether it's monitoring for TCP connections, checking for the existence of a file, or whatever you wish it to do, will run in the background quite happily. So let's compile our program and let's try this out. Our program is now compiled, and there it is there. Now, first thing we have to do is we have to install our service. If you look at the beginning of the program, we'll see we called our service this, AAA Test Service. Now if we have a look at the Task Manager again and look at services, since we are sorted by name, there is no AAA Test Service on the service list at the moment. So we have to install it. Now with many other programming languages, you would have to create an installer to install your service. But this application in its own right is its own installer and its own uninstaller. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to open a console window. Depending on how Windows 10 is set up on your machine, if we right click and look at the taskbar settings, we'll see that one of the options in the taskbar is to replace the command prompt with the Windows PowerShell in the menu. Now if I turn that off, when I do the Windows key and X, I should get up an option I can actually use. And there it is. Command prompt admin. You need to be admin because you're actually installing a service. So if we click on that and say yes, we'll get this in the screen. Now we need to go to the drive where our executable is actually sitting, and we want to change directory to the directory in which our source code is actually sitting, which is this one here. And in order to install our service, all we need to do is to run our application, which we have just compiled, with the install flag. -install. And our service has now been installed. It is that simple to install our service. Now let's minimize this for the moment and have a look at our services again. Back to the Task Manager and into Services. And there we have AAA Test Service at the top of the list. The service is installed, but it's currently stopped. Now the task of our service was to look inside the ctemp folder. So let's have a look inside ctemp. So we'll minimize our Task Manager for the moment and we'll open up the ctemp folder. Now there's currently nothing in this folder. Just to test this out, let's have a look at what the service is going to do. It's going to wipe any file of this name. So if we go back into our folder and we will create a new file. And we'll put something in it. And saving that, we now have a file with some information in it. Now since our service is currently installed but not running, nothing will touch this file. This file would stay here until such times as we decide to do something with it. So let's move this over to the side of the screen so we can actually see it. And we'll bring back our Task Manager. And we'll adjust the size. Now, currently the file is there. If we right click on the service and click Start, the service is now running and the file has been erased. So if we attempt to recreate our file, and we wait 10 seconds, and the file gets erased. So the service is quite successfully running in the background, and every 10 seconds it's checking for the presence of the file and it's deleting it. So if we create a different file, and create the same one again, and we wait for 10 seconds, and the service kills the file it's been told to kill, and it does not wipe the other file. So our service appears to be running quite successfully. Having installed and run our service, we may come to a time we wish to uninstall a service. So when you need to do that, the first thing to do is to stop the service running. Having stopped the service running, we just have to go back to our console window, and the parameter we want now is uninstall. It will tell us the service has been uninstalled, and if we look back at our Task Manager, we'll see it's no longer in the list of services. So how do we set it to be an automatic start? Well, let's go back and reinstall our service again. So our service is installed. It's on the list of services, at least it would be if we refresh the screen. Let's just refresh the Task Manager. There's a service. We can set that to start. But to set it to automatically start, we need to go into the Open Services. And we'll see inside here, if we sort it by name, there's our AE test service. It's currently running, it's set to manual. If you right click on that and click on properties, you then get some options. It's currently running. You can start and stop it from inside this services window, and you can change the startup type. So if we make it automatic, you can go for delayed start, or you can just do automatic. Depends on what your service is going to be doing. If you need to wait until Windows is fully booted up, go for the delayed start. You can also set what the logon as. So in this case, we're just logging on as a local system account because we're not really that fussed. But if you need to do a logon as a specific account, you can actually specify that in here. You can specify recovery options should the service for some reason fail. And you can also set dependencies. So in theory, if you had some important service actually running, you could actually enable actions. And on your first failure, you could run a program. So having picked run a program on one of the failure levels, you could then use that program to inform you in some way, perhaps sending an email, a text message, or updating something in a database. So having set this to automatic, when we OK it, then this service will now start up automatically whenever Windows boots up. And again from here, we can quite happily stop it. The service is now stopped. We can go back to our console window and we can uninstall it. And we would need to refresh our list. Having refreshed our list, we'll see that our AAA service is no longer on there. So we have successfully shown how to install and uninstall a service and get the service to perform some function in the background. So you now have a way of creating your own services. Obviously each service needs to have a unique name, otherwise it would get very confusing. It's also a good idea to have a separate executable name. Now you can quite happily compile a separate executable by doing this. It would then compile to the new name. So this has been a brief introduction to services. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.